Good morning, everybody. This is the Men's Sunday School class here at Mercy Baptist Church. My name is Robert Rathbone, and we are starting a new series of lessons in 2 Samuel. Today we'll be in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses. We'll be hitting the first 5 verses, then verses 10 through 12, and then 17 through 25. And the book of 2 Samuel basically picks up where the book of 1 Samuel ends. And they may very well have been one book. But we're going to be looking at, through this series of lessons, looking at King David. David, the king of Israel. Looking at what made him a great king, why he was a man after God's own heart. And this morning in this chapter, we're going to see that even though the Lord was with David, the Lord had promised David that he would be king. You remember back in 1 Samuel, Samuel the prophet came and anointed David to be king, but he was still a youth then. He anointed him to be king, but he would not become king until many years after that. And even in this chapter, when Saul dies at the end of 1 Samuel, David doesn't immediately become king over Israel. He does become king over his own tribe of Judah. They come to him, as we'll see here in a few minutes, and they anoint him as king over Judah. But it still took another 7.5 years after that before David became king over the entire nation of Israel. See, David, even though God promised him, he didn't get impatient and say, "But Lord, you promised me, why isn't it happening?" David trusted the Lord was going to keep his promise, and that he would keep his promise in his time when the time was right. So even though it took years for it to happen, David trusted the Lord that the Lord was going to keep his promise. So before we get going, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, I want to thank you again for your love and mercy and grace, Father. And as we look at David's life, Father, I pray that you would teach us, help us to see the lessons, Lord, that you would have for us to learn, and teach us, Father, to be patient and to trust you, and then emulate David in the sense that he loved you, he consulted with you, and he allowed you to guide his life. So, Father, all these things we ask in the precious name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. Before we get into verse 1, we're starting in chapter 5. So after the death of King Saul, David follows the Lord's leading, and he returns to Judah, which was David was of the tribe of Judah, and he comes to live in Hebron. You can see that in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. That's when representatives of Judah, they come to David and they anoint him to be king over Judah. That's in chapter 2, verse 4. Meanwhile, over the next 7.5 years, Saul's son Ishbosheth, he reigns as king over the remaining 11 tribes of Israel. And there's a war. I don't know who was the aggressor. If I suspect that maybe Ishbosheth saw David as a competitor to his throne, but there was a war for those 7.5 years between Ishbosheth and David. You can see that in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verse 1. And this war did not end until Ishbosheth was assassinated by 2 captains from his own army, and that left Israel without a king. So now we come to verse 1 of chapter 5. And it says, "Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. All right, so it says all the tribes of Israel came to David unto Hebron. So after Ishbosheth is assassinated, all the other tribes of Israel, they send representatives to David. They come to Hebron, where David's living and where he's governing as king of Judah. And now it seems they are ready, since they do not have a king, they are ready for David to be their king. And so they speak, this is in spake and saying, behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. So one of the reasons, or the ways they are approaching David and said, we want you to be king, is because he says, we are thy bone and thy flesh. In other words, we're basically the same family, because they descend from Jacob, or Israel, and so is David. He says, look, we all come from the same family line. We are the same flesh and blood. And another thing, and I don't know if they had this in mind or not, but according to Mosaic law, they were to Israel was never to anoint a foreigner as being king over Israel. Deuteronomy 17:15. The Mosaic law says, thou shalt not in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God... Thou shalt in any wise set him king over thee, whom the Lord thy God shall choose. One from among thy brethren shalt thou set king over thee. Thou mayest not set a stranger, or that is a foreigner, over thee, which is not thy brother. So they're going in compliance with the Mosaic law. So they come to David and said, look, we're the same blood, and so we want you to be king. And then verse 2, another reason they give is that because of his past as a great military leader. It says, also in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that leddest out and broughtest in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. So that first part, he says, when Saul was king, you was the one that led us out and brought us back in. And that's talking about out on military campaigns when there was wars to be fought, battles to be fought. They said, you're the one that went out, was the great leader to lead us out, and you brought us back home victorious. And so they're saying, look, you've already demonstrated that you are a capable military leader. And that began when the Lord used David to defeat Goliath, and it continued up until a point that David had to flee from Saul because Saul was wanting to kill him. All right. And then the next reason they give is that it was God's will. God had promised him. He says, and the Lord said unto thee, thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be captain over Israel. So it appears that this promise that, or the idea that the Lord had chosen David to be king, apparently had become common knowledge. Back when Samuel anointed David as king, it was kind of done sort of in secret, because Samuel was afraid that Saul would, if he found out, he would try to kill him. But apparently over the years, word of that had gotten around, and there may have been other things that happened, that revelations that reinforce that. But so now here they understand. He said the Lord said, where it was the Lord's promise. He said that you would feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. And that's what a good, righteous, godly leader over people is supposed to do. They are to feed the people, or to protect the people, that they take care of the people that they are governing over. And he says, thou shalt be a captain, in other words, a protector, someone who would lead them in the right direction and to lead them out, to against the enemy, to defeat the enemy. So he was, God had promised that David that he would be a protector of the people and a provider for the people. And this was something that, going back to it being common knowledge, even Abner, which was Israel's, let me take that back, Saul's general, actually I think he was Saul's uncle, but Abner was Saul's general over the army of Israel. And after Saul's death, Abner is a supporter of Saul's family, and so he's supporting Ishbosheth. But then he and Ishbosheth have a falling out. And so he tells Ishbosheth that he's going to go in compliance, or he's going to follow what the Lord's will is, because even Abner knows that it's the Lord's will that David be king. And so he says, I'm going to start working toward that end. And so he contacts the leaders of Israel, the elders, and talks to them about making David king as the Lord had planned. You can see that in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. And so now these representatives of Israel are now acknowledging that to David that it's the Lord's will that he be king. And so they are asking him, or they're putting forth the proposition that, hey, you need to be our king. And so apparently David agrees with them. And so verse 3, it says, so all the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron, and the king David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. So apparently after these representatives go home with the message from David that, okay, I'll agree to your terms, the elders come back and then they make it official. One thing to notice here is that it talks about David being king. The writer here is reminding us that David's already king of Judah. He says the elders of Israel came to the king to Hebron. This is even before they have anointed him king of Israel. And it says, and the king David made a league with them. And so he's reminding us that David's already a king, but now Israel wants him to be king over the entire nation. And so it says, and the king David made a league with them. A league is a covenant, an agreement. You could almost call it a contract, but it's a covenant with these elders that presumably laid out David's responsibilities as king, and then the people's responsibilities as his subjects, those that he would be governing, that they would follow him, and he would be a protector, he would be a provider, he would do all the things that a king should do. And so with the Lord as a witness, it says he made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord. So the Lord is the witness to the goings on there. And this is when they anointed David king over Israel. So he's now officially the king of Israel over all 12 tribes. So verse 4, it says, and David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. In Hebron, he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem, he reigned 33 years over all Israel and Judah. So that first line says, and David was 30 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years. So apparently when he became the king over Judah, he was 30 years old. And then he reigned 40 years. That's going to include his time as king over Judah, as well as the time over Israel. And so you do the math, he was 70 years old when he died. And it says, in Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years, 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 33 years over all of Israel and Judah. So the writer here is explaining that 40 years. He's breaking it down into showing that 7.5 was over Judah, and the remaining 33 was over all of Israel. All right, so our book has us skipping down to verse 10, verses 6 through 9. It covers how Jerusalem became part of Israel. It says, at this time, Jerusalem did not yet belong to Israel because it was inhabited by Jebusites. David captures the city of the Jebusites, and he proclaims it to be the city of David. And so Jerusalem becomes David's capital city, and it's from Jerusalem that he rules over all of Israel. All right, so we come to verse 10. It says, and David went on and grew great, and the Lord of hosts was with him. So David was a man who loved God, he loved the Lord, and so the Lord was with him. And the Lord, because the Lord was with him, he caused him to prosper and to become great. And I wish every leader, well, not only in this country but in all countries, would recognize that. If you want to be a great leader, if you want to prosper and grow great, you need to love the Lord and follow Him and obey Him, as we'll see here that David does. Because God honors those that honor Him. You can see that in 1 Samuel 2 verse 30, where I think Samuel's talking to David, because he's talking to Saul and kind of reprimanding Saul because Saul had disobeyed, and he said the Lord honors those that honor Him. So if you want to prosper, honor the Lord, and He will honor you. He will bless you. All right. So verse 11, it says, and Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David a house. All right, so this King Hiram of Tyre, Tyre was a seaport city of Phoenicia that was north of Israel on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And King Hiram apparently sends messengers to David to congratulate him apparently on becoming king and all his successes that he had had so far. And so the two kings become friends, and these two nations of Tyre and Phoenicia, they enjoy a commercial relationship of trading goods and services for many years. It even lasts even into Solomon's reign later on. And so Hiram sends messengers to David, and then apparently later on he sends cedar trees, carpenters, and masons, and they built David a house. Because Tyre and Sidon were known for having skilled craftsmen that could cut trees and use the lumber to build beautiful buildings. You can see that 1 Kings chapter 5, verse 6. And so David makes a deal with Hiram to build a house of cedar for him. All right, so verse 12, it says, and David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. All right, notice that first line. It says, and David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel. You know, if you perceive something, it means you recognize it, you acknowledge it, you understand it. And so David is recognizing that all his success, the fact that he'd become king and the fact that he was becoming great, that he's been prospering, he didn't sit there and say, boy, what a great king I am. You know, he recognizes that the Lord was the one that put him there. The Lord is the one who's blessing him, who's taking care of him, that's guiding him, that's making him great. It's not his own abilities, but it's the Lord And that's even us who are not leaders. We need to understand that if something's going good for us, it's because the Lord's blessing us, not because we're so smart or we're so talented or skilled. And then notice the second line. It says, he recognized that the Lord had established him over Israel. The next line says, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake. This is something I wish leaders all over the world would recognize. David understood that. He said, look, God's not blessing me just for me so I can benefit, so I can have money, and so I can have a great name, and people can applaud me and say, oh, what a great king you are. He's not doing it for that. He's doing it for his people Israel's sake. He is doing it, and that's what every leader should recognize, is that you're not in your position for your own sake, for your own greatness. It is because so you can serve the people, so you can be their provider, their protector. And so the Lord had promised, the Lord is prospering David so that the people of Israel could reap the rewards of having a righteous king who loves God, who obeys God, and rules accordingly. Because a nation, whether it's Israel or America or any other nation on the earth, a nation's citizens benefit when their leaders are righteous. Proverbs 29 verse 2 says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked beareth rule, the people mourn. And so it was a blessing to Israel that they had a godly king, a righteous king who loved God and wanted to obey God. All right. So now our book has us skipping down to verse 17. Verses 13 through 16, it talks about, back in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verses 2 through 5, it lists the sons that David fathered while he was in Hebron. Now he's made his residence in Jerusalem. He takes more wives and concubines, and then verses 13 through 16 lists the sons that he fathered while he's living in Jerusalem. All right, so we come to verse 17. It says, but when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines came up to seek David. And David heard of it and went down to the hold. All right, so I think to get the context of this, you got to think about when David was fleeing from Saul years before. There was a period of time when he went and hid himself amongst the Philistines to get himself out of the reach of Saul. And he had led the king, the Philistine king Achish, to believe that he had defected from Israel and that he was aligning himself with the Philistines. You can see that in 1 Samuel chapters 27 and 29. So now that the Philistines have heard that David is king of Israel, they may have felt betrayed. They may have felt duped by David, and so now they've mobilized their army to come and seek revenge. And now so when David hears about it, he goes to the hold, or that is the stronghold, the fortress. And so he's preparing for battle. So then verse 18 says, and the Philistines also came and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go up to the Philistines? Wilt thou deliver them into my hand? And the Lord said unto David, go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thine hand. All right, so the Philistines came and they spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And the valley of Rephaim, it means the valley of the giants. And that may go back to when Israel first came into the land of Canaan, and they said, oh, there's giants in the land and we're like grasshoppers next to them. Anyway, that valley was a plain that was just southwest of Jerusalem. And so the Philistines may have chosen that location there because they might have believed it gave them a tactical advantage against David, particularly because it was so close to Jerusalem. They thought, well, we're going to fight. We're going to fight David on his own home turf. And David, it says, and David inquired of the Lord, saying, "Shall I go up to the Philistines? And wilt thou deliver them into mine hand?" So he wisely consults with the Lord. He doesn't think, "Oh, I think I can take them," or I think I can figure out a good battle plan or something. He asked the Lord. He said, "Lord, what should I do? How should I handle this? Where should I go up against them and start fighting them? And if I do, are you going to give me the victory?" And if that's another thing, if only our leaders today would consult with the Lord rather than relying on their own human reasoning to decide what they think is best, and say, "Lord, what do you say is best? How should I govern these people?" In fact, that's what Solomon said. He said, "Lord, when the Lord came to Solomon and said, ask whatever you will," he said, "Give me wisdom, because I'm young and I don't know how to go in and out, and I don't know how to govern this people of yours." And it pleased the Lord so much that he gave Solomon that and so much more. All right, so David inquired, "Shall I go up to the Philistines, and will you deliver them into my hand?" And the Lord said unto David, "Go up, for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into your hand." So the Lord promises him, "Yes, go ahead, go attack them, and I'm going to give you the victory." All right, so verse 20, it says, "And David came to Baal Perazim, and David smote them there, and said, The Lord hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me as the breach of waters. Therefore he called the name of the place Baal Perazim." All right, so we don't know for sure where Baal Perazim is, but apparently it was in the valley of Rephaim or nearby. But this is where David chose to engage the enemy. And notice he credits the Lord with the victory, because he makes the statement, he makes the declaration. He said, "The Lord hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me as the breach of waters." The word or the phrase there, "broken forth," it means to burst through, and he compares it to as the breach of waters, like flood waters. When they come and we talk about like levees and stuff, and the flood waters coming and breaking the levees down and such. He said the Lord, and David knew that floodwaters could just bust through, many things. And so he said, "The Lord has busted through onto my enemies, just like floodwaters bursting through a levee or a dam or whatever kind of barrier that you tried to put up to stop it." He says the Lord broke through just like that. And so he credits the Lord with the victory. And as a result, he names the place Baal Perazim, and that means Lord of the outburst. So he's given all the credit to the Lord for giving him the victory, and he names the place where he defeated the Philistines Lord of the outburst, as a reminder that, yes, God gave me the victory here. It wasn't my military prowess or the strength of my army. It was the Lord that gave me the victory. And again, I wish our leaders today would follow David's example and trust the Lord and give him the credit for the victories. And then notice verse 21. It says, "And there they left their images, and David and his men burned them." See, the fleeing Philistines had left behind the images of their gods that they had trusted would give them the victory. But David and his men, they wisely disposed of these images so they wouldn't be a temptation to Israel. And this also was in obedience to the Mosaic law. And in Deuteronomy 7:5 it says, But thus shall ye deal with them. This is Lord talking to Israel about when they entered into the land of Canaan. He says, this is how you need to deal with them. Whenever you attack them and defeat them and take their land. He says, thus shall ye deal with them. Ye shall destroy their altars, break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. And so the Lord was telling them, whenever you go in and you take the land from the Canaanites, destroy all their false gods and everything, because the Lord knew that that would become a temptation. And so David follows that guideline, well, not even a guideline, that he follows that command to do so. But a later king, Amaziah, which I think is a descendant of David, he was not so wise, and he took home idols captured from the enemy, and then he begins to worship them, despite the fact that these idols had not helped the ones, their previous owners, the ones that he just defeated. These idols didn't help them, and yet he takes those same idols, takes them home, and they become his idols. You can see that in 2 Chronicles chapter 25, verses 14 and 15. I mean, the Lord rebukes Amaziah. He says, what do you think? You think it makes any sense? I'm paraphrasing it very loosely, but he says, how much sense does it make for you to worship idols that couldn't even help the ones that you just got through defeating? All right, so David and his men burned the idols that the Philistines had left behind. So then verse 22 says, And the Philistines came up yet again and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, Thou shalt not go up, but fetch a compass behind them, and come upon them over against the mulberry trees. And let it be when thou hearest the sound of a going in the tops of the mulberry trees, then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then shall the Lord go out before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. All right, so the Philistines come back. We're not really told how much later, if this was shortly after the first defeat, or if they took time and rebuilt their army and said, now we can go take David. But they come back to the exact same spot, to the valley of Rephaim. And it's kind of like the same scenario again. But David, when he inquires of the Lord this time, the Lord tells him, he said, Nope, thou shalt not go up. Instead of hitting them face on or head on, he says, fetch a compass. In other words, go all the way around them and come in from behind, nearby a grove of mulberry trees. And they're to wait there until they hear the signal from the Lord. And that signal was a sound of a going, or the word means marching. In other words, when they hear the marching sound in the tops of the mulberry trees, that's their signal that they are to advance on the enemy. And then he says, then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then the Lord shall go out before thee to smite the host of the Philistines. He said, when you hear the sound of going, you know that I'm heading out. I'm going to hit the enemy first. I'm going to go before you, and I'm going to ensure that you have victory over the enemy. And so verse 25, And David did so as the Lord had commanded him, and smote the Philistines from Geba until thou come to Gazer. So it might be that the Philistines decide, we're going to come back to the same place. David's going to come out. He's going to come out against us the same way he did before. And so in my thought, we'll adapt our tactics when we're ready for David. But the Lord gives David a different battle plan. He says, no, don't hit them head on. Go all the way around. Come in from behind. And David was victorious that day because he obeyed. And so it says David did so, as the Lord commanded him, and he smote the Philistines. In other words, he beat them. He defeated them. And it says, from Geba until thou come to Gazer. So apparently the Philistines flee the battlefield again. and David is pursuing them with his army from Geba to Gezer, and that's a distance of some 18 miles, according to one commentator. But David has a total victory because he obeyed the Lord. And now, how much more successful would our leaders be if they followed the Lord, obeyed, they read this book and took the information in that and as a guidance to how they should act, how they should govern people, how they should, and we wouldn't have all this foolishness and fighting that's going on, in Congress or in city halls or wherever, when people follow what the Lord says instead of their own ideas of what they think is best. Because, that goes back to the human. The root of sin in human hearts is we're arrogant, we're prideful, we think we know best, and we want to follow our way instead of the Lord's way. But that becomes even more important for a leader, because a leader's life, his choices affect not only his own life, but all those that they govern. And you read through the Old Testament, when Israel had a good king, Israel prospered. When they had an evil, wicked king, they became, they would get oppressed by their enemies, and things would just go against them. And I wish our leaders would understand that things prosper whenever they follow the Lord. All right. I just got the book for our lessons, so we'll pick up there or somewhere close to there next week, later on in Second Samuel. So we'll pick up there next week.